welcome to our third session of this morning. This is the third one's always the hard one because everyone's already had two sessions. They're already filled up. But I appreciate you all for taking the time to join us here. I'm sure people will be filtering in as we discuss what is probably the hottest topic in not only this industry, but really the entire media industry. And it's also a little controversial, which is the whole concept of over the top. And our question for today is, are you ready to go over the top? So who out there thinks they're ready to go over the top?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Who doesn't know if they're ready to go over the top? Okay. Only one person doesn't. That's good. So we're going to begin with first introductions from our panelists. Ryan, why don't you start first as far as tell us where you're from and what you're all about?
Well, I'm originally from Europe, so I actually didn't go to a U.S. college, so anything I say is irrelevant to this room, I guess. But my name is Ryan Jespersen, and I'm a streaming media technologist for Wowza Media Systems.
I'm Michael Calderon. I'm Vice President of Programming and Digital Media for the Big Ten Network.
And Matt Panto. I'm the Assistant Executive Director for Digital Media at the Ivy League office.
Excellent. So we're going to begin by spending a few minutes, I guess, first of all, trying to find a definition for what exactly is over the top. In our program, I guess from talking to you guys earlier, we were wrong, where we started out by talking about the TV everywhere era has put content in the viewer's hands anywhere at any time. Over the top is not necessarily TV everywhere. So Ryan, let's start with you as far as maybe, and each of you kind of reflect and discuss amongst yourselves for a few minutes. You know, what is the difference between over the top, TV everywhere, and web streaming? You know, if someone's web streaming, is that an over the top service?
Well, I think traditionally with IPTV, looking back, 10 years, 15 years, people owned a proprietary network, so a cable provider would send it to their own set-top box and deliver that. With over the top, what you're doing is you're pretty much delivering video and audio in a public domain over the internet. So it's a kind of non-proprietary, using the public internet to actually deliver. I think the difference between OTT and TV everywhere is that with TV everywhere, you can think the example of Comcast. They have a conventional cable delivery system to IPTV boxes, and then in addition to that, they have their own app, they have their own website, and they're delivering their content everywhere. With OTT, the difference there is that you're going over the top, and you have a lot of different players who can get into this space and be able to deliver to these devices that are non-proprietary. So I think that's kind of a way, and in order to actually deliver, you need to do it through a streaming server or a streaming protocol, and that's where Wowza kind of fits in. Not to give you too much of a sales pitch, but we're able to take that in and then actually deliver that over different streaming protocols and over the conventional HTTP protocols as well, like Apple HLS. So I think that's really kind of a breakdown of the difference between TV everywhere, IPTV, and OTT.
That's absolutely right, and we look at it specifically from a cable programmer's perspective. At the Big Ten Network, we have both TV everywhere, a TV everywhere application and a over-the-top application. We have our BTN to Go platform, which requires the consumer to have a subscription to the Big Ten Network through a traditional pay TV outlet, satellite, telco, cable. You need to enter your DirecTV or Comcast or Time Warner cable credentials to watch our content on your smartphone, on your tablet, on any connected device that we'll be launching this year. And it supports the pay TV model. It supports the bundle. Over the top would be if we sell that content or any other content directly to a consumer. At the Big Ten Network, we have a product called BTN Plus that we integrate into the BTN to Go platform. It has about 800 additional non-televised events that are offered as a direct-to-consumer project or product. So you can buy for $10 a month, you can buy a school pass. For $15 a month, you can buy a conference pass. To me, the distinction between TV everywhere and over the top is the business model behind it. Is it supporting the cable bundle, or is it direct to consumer from programmer to consumer? Another example in the industry that most of you might be familiar with is HBO. HBO Go is their TV everywhere application. HBO Now, which was launched a couple of months ago, is the same content as HBO through your cable subscription, but it's direct to consumer. You can pay that directly to HBO and subscribe in a separate application.
And I guess the big difference between using the HBO example, not that I've used HBO Go, but I don't know if you can actually dial into the live linear service, right? So this would be more over the top, would really also, you're able to access the linear TV signal versus necessarily, or is that? Or can people do whatever they want?
You may be right. I don't know if the 24/7 linear feed is available on HBO now, but I think that's beside the point, because in an over-the-top IP delivered world, it's an on-demand world. And other than maybe a fight, what is HBO showing that needs to be consumed live when it can be available on demand and you can watch it near live if you'd like? Everything that they have is entertainment based for the most part, so it doesn't need to have a live simulcast of the 24/7 channel.
Right. Matt, the Ivy League perspective?
Yeah, so for us, we're in year 2 of what we call the Ivy League Digital Network, pure subscription model, and OTT kind of represents an opportunity for us. We've kind of begun to explore what's going on and maybe analyze the atmosphere. Traditional model, similar to the Big Ten, you can have school passes, conference passes. One thing that we did a couple years ago when it launched, to the good work of folks well before my time, was make sure that it was an HTML5 platform. You can get it everywhere right now. So for us, in the lack of maybe linear content of conferences of our size, we're more on the making sure that you can get it on desktop, mobile, tablet, and everywhere else that you'd like to see it. It's still appointment television for us right now, and our core demographic wants to watch the game live. There is an audience for archive events, but most everybody wants to watch where it is and wherever they are right now. For us, we accomplish that mission with the Ivy League Digital Network where we stand right now. I think as you go and try to attract maybe a more casual sports fan, a casual audience, that's when you start to go maybe over the top model, TV everywhere, whatever you want to call it, and it presents different opportunities of where you can go and how you can expand not only your brand, but maybe your audience as well.
Gotcha. So how many people in the room have a Roku or an Apple TV or a Chromecast? Okay, wow, that is I'm kind of, are you surprised? I'm kind of surprised by that. No?
Not with this group.
Not with this group. So is anybody subscribing to an over-the-top service? Any Sling TVers out there? Okay, so we have a few. So, so here's where do you need to have a deal with a Roku or an app? Does the conversation of over-the-top start with, the president of the university comes in or whoever says, I want over-the-top, or the conference says, I want over-the-top, and then there's a discussion with Apple TV or Roku or is that where it starts, or?
I think that, with a lot of the conversation, the interesting thing about this panel is, I'll talk about the technology side of it, and then there's a completely different side, which is the business side of it, the business needs. And like you said, it usually does start with the president of the university saying, I want this on my device at home, and then everyone else has got to follow, right? But really from a technology perspective, the deployment aspect of getting to all these different devices is quite complex. It's actually extremely complex. There are different SDKs for Chromecast, for Roku, for Apple TV, for Xbox, for PlayStation. You have to pretty much have different development teams to be able to do this. That's cost prohibitive for definitely any university, even for a lot of conferences that maybe have the resources of 12 or 20 different universities. But really, internally, it's too hard to do. So a lot of times, that has to be outsourced to a third party. The other side to it, too, is you're developing this technology, but it changes. It changes all the time. So really being able to pick your spots as to what devices you want to end up getting into is really the key.
Yeah, we've been very deliberate in terms of investing in over-the-top connected devices, whether it's a game console, whether it's a Roku or Apple TV. We developed early on in BTN To Go's existence for iOS and for Android, and that got us a huge percentage of the market share that we needed for smartphones and tablets. But as a content company, not a technology company, as a company that that needs to be mindful of budgets. We can't afford to spend several $100,000 to develop for a platform that may or may not meet the demand that we expected. If you can't spend $600,000 to develop for Xbox 360 and Xbox One and have 300 people watch every time we have a game on. So it is an industry-wide problem. And we talked about it earlier. It's not necessarily sustainable to have dozens and dozens of different platforms for content owners to develop for. How that industry problem is solved remains to be seen. So we've been very slow in terms of developing for these connected devices over the top. We are based on industry trends. What we see in 2014, what we saw in 2014, for example, was sort of Roku and Chromecast in terms of sales and engagement with user base sort of distance themselves a little bit, and also in terms of what we hear from our viewers, more requests for us to develop for Roku and for Chromecast. So BTN this summer is working on launching and developing for Roku and Chromecast that'll be in place before football season. But I think the issue is an important one. One thing that has happened, I think, recently, and I'm curious from a Wowza perspective, how you view this, or we talked a little bit earlier about, will the web browser become the de facto one platform that everybody has to develop for? But Roku, which is a really remarkable technology and platform, their strategy is to try to become the smart operating system for television manufacturers. And they had a deal this past year with a couple of Chinese manufacturers to get entry into the U.S. TV market. And so these no-name Chinese manufacturers that aren't familiar names in this country launched Roku TVs that had Roku built in as the smart operating system. That went really well. They sold very quickly. Sharp now is the first kind of name brand manufacturer to announce that they're going to integrate Roku as their smart operating system. And I think, should that be the road that the industry goes down? If there's one player, whether it's Roku or somebody else, that can sort of become the smart TV operating platform that is in almost all of the televisions out there that are sold, that helps from a development standpoint. We don't have to develop for LG's platform and for Samsung's platform and for Sony's platform. And it really will help push along this idea of smart connected televisions.
Well, it's funny because I'll bet you that conversation began because the people at LG, it was LG, right, said, you know what, because this is what I always found with the TV sets. Every year they're having to introduce new sets with smart TV functionality, which has different processors from year after year, which means their teams are busy doing stuff, and how big is that market as far as how many people are really using it? And so they probably had the same conversation, said we have to outsource this as well, so let's make a deal with Roku, and they'll probably, maybe they can probably integrate other people too if they wanted to, I would guess, maybe.
Well, I think the reality of smart TVs, I just saw a poll recently that says 10% of smart TV owners plug it into the internet. Like literally, it's the truth. I bet most of you have smart TVs and you rather use your Xbox or your Chromecast device. You don't even use the smart TV functionality. And the truth of it is it has a CPU inside of it, but the CPU is rubbish. Like it's not enough to really do true, good 1080p streaming. So it's almost like a checkbox on the marketing checkbox list for these smart TV owners. So, I actually didn't hear about the Roku SDK, the software development kit. It's a great idea to actually pretty much give out this code to these smart TV manufacturers so that they don't have to develop it in-house. And it also has the functionality, way beyond what they can do internally from a budget perspective.
Mm-hmm. So Matt, you mentioned the casual fan. So, and I guess this is another question is, does the casual fan, how do you define that, and why are they not engaging with what you guys are offering now? So, and how do you see over the top possibly getting them engaged?
So I think the first 2 years of our digital network, we've done a good job of maybe attracting our core demographic and people that are interested right off the bat on Ivy League sports, Ivy League institutions, and everything that maybe it stands for. I think the next step for us is going to, like you said, the more casual fan that may just stumble upon content. So can an OTT model help? We've used the word stumble upon it. Our athletic directors, our administrations come to us and say, we want more people, more eyes, we want to spread the Ivy League message. Well, that's great. In the first 2 years, we've done that maybe to our core demographics. How can we kind of move on, expand our audience, and go from there? We talked about it beforehand. Whether you partner with someone with Roku or a technological partner, right now we're partnered with New Line. They do a great job of figuring maybe all that stuff out for us. We want to give them, to everyone else's point, the business plan and the business objectives. We leave that, maybe the technical side of whether it's smart to partner with Roku or Apple TV or whoever it is, that's kind of on them, and we trust them to have a great relationship, obviously, and continue to take us forward that meets our objectives.
Gotcha. So as far as the OTT product, the actual stuff that's on it. So you mentioned on demand, and but obviously sports is a lot live. So does OTT, if you're thinking about it, does it have to have a different offering than a TV everywhere service or an app or
So for us, one of the big conversations that we've had in this is, can you program it? I think there's a level of expectation that if you go somewhere, not only is the production quality a standard, but the programming is a standard as well. Can you keep fans engaged? Can you keep them consuming as much content as time allows for? I think that's the big question. So in these first 2 years, you don't launch a network successfully, and I think the SEC guys did a great job of describing that. It's not all as good as it can possibly be right off the bat. You're going to learn things in year 1, you're going to refine them in year 2, and then in year 3 and 4, you really hope that you start to maybe hit your groove and understand things. Whether it's workflows, whether it's content sharing between, in our case, our 8 member institutions, every piece of the puzzle matters to us when you're putting a platform together like this. So starting out and getting all of everything maybe in a straight row and getting people working together, our multimedia directors do a great job of content sharing, communicating. I think that goes a long, long way, because the expectation once you build something like this is that there's programming 24/7. One other thing that we struggle with, maybe for us specifically, is, I'll give an example of our basketball season. Our basketball season, we have Friday and Saturday night games. So maybe the live content is driving it. That's great on Friday and Saturday nights and everything else that's going on throughout the weekend. How do you fill Monday through Thursday? For us, that's been key in trying to figure out in the first 2 years, and we continue to try to figure it out. We'll talk about it again, obviously, throughout the summer, but to me, there's a certain level of expectation that comes with a OTT, TV everywhere type of model.
Well, does OT? Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I think live events definitely drive everything that we do at the Big Ten Network. But the challenge for us is, how do we surround the live events with ancillary programming, shoulder programming that is going to be interesting and viewed by our heavy users and people that are in BTN to go. How do we give people a reason to jump into the BTN to go platform when there's not a live event that they're looking to watch? And a lot of it comes down to rights. And I think the rights it's an interesting discussion for the people in this room, because at a lot of the schools, certain rights have around the country, certain rights have been assigned over to the conference, who then have turned those rights over, sold those rights to a media entity like BTN or ESPN or somebody else. And from our perspective, our challenge at BTN is to try to surround our live events on our BTN to Go platform with content that either BTN produces or that our member institutions produce, that we have the rights to distribute on our platforms in such a way that really plays to the school affinity. Because generally speaking, you're a fan of a particular Big Ten school or an SEC school or an ACC school, but you're not a fan of necessarily of the conference. You might root for the conference in postseason play, but you don't necessarily have this big allegiance to your conference. You're a fan of your school first. And so one of the things we're looking to do is figure out a way, how do we create more school-centric experiences within BTN to Go? How do we leverage some of the great content that each of our member institutions is investing in and producing more so today than ever before?
Well, it's interesting walking through the Hall of Fame last night, when you had the RFID tag, and it was a very personalized museum experience, so as opposed to being sort of, you have to kind of hunt and find your stuff. So how do you think, what do you think is how can you do that cost effectively to make sure that it's a more harmonized, personalized experience?
I mean, I think personalization is an option. If we know you're a Penn State fan or an Indiana fan, if we can cater the content that's on the launch page of BTN to Go when you launch the app, whether it's on a connected device or your tablet, and deliver content front and center to you that we think is relevant to you based on what we know about you from your profile information, that's certainly one way to do it. And I think just from a cost perspective in terms of the content creation, we have to be better about leveraging the rights that we have at BTN, because every school is producing tremendous content today. They're investing resources on short form content, ranging from a quick Q&A with an offensive coordinator after a practice on a Wednesday to a really great all access 12-minute feature that they went on the road with the soccer team and got to know some of the kids on the soccer team. There's all this terrific content coming out of every campus around the country these days. The challenge for BTN as the rights holder for this type of content in terms of distribution is get it in front of as many people as possible, expose it to as many people as possible, and that benefits both BTN and our member institutions.
And I think from the user experience side is really the only thing keeping Comcast and DirecTV and Dish Network in business right now is live sports, and I think they'd be the first to admit it. And that the NFL package and all that. We see what NBC did with Sunday Night Football. Sunday Night Football has taken over Monday Night Football. And it's become the biggest viewer of the NFL on any given weekend. With Sunday Night Football, a big part of that is their OTT experience that NBC did with their player. One thing they did is they actually pulled in all these multiple camera feeds and give the user the ability to actually switch themselves. That's something that is not available in linear, conventional, TV structures. Getting that in and developing a player that can support that is something great. The other side to OTT as well, and developing an app or developing a website that can support this, is something like a tunnel cam. That you're in stadium, you can actually do these different views of what's going on inside the stadium, something that wasn't conventionally happening before. Instead of the producer or the broadcaster, deciding what angle, you can choose the angle. And that's kind of changed, and I can see conventional linear broadcasting going in that direction down the road as maybe that becomes a true OTT platform as well. I think from the live to VOD side of it, be able to live stream record and have that available directly as a video on demand asset is a huge part of the streaming workflow. And the other side to it too, from a feature perspective, is DVR. So people are used to that TiVo type rewind, live pause, playback. You want a streaming platform that can support that and be able to do that and keep that cache available. And a lot of that is dependent on the rights that you have with that content, whether you can do it or not. I actually have Sling TV, the app, and I've noticed with some of their channels, they don't have the rights to actually live stream rewind. With some channels they do. It's kind of funny how they've been able to distinguish that from a business perspective, the technologies there. So I think there's all those different features that are opening people's eyes a little bit to getting away from conventional broadcasting. It's kind of like the print industry, getting away from print, going into digital. It's almost the same as happening for TV. You need to kind of get out of the mindset of a typical broadcaster, and with a lot of us, we've grown up with that. We've grown up with tape. Now we're in digital. Now we've taken the next step into this TV everywhere, and it changes the way you look at things.
And how can you integrate everything in? So, our live experience right now, you can follow along on Twitter, all in the same window, follow along on Twitter, watch 4 games, and follow the live stats as well. How can you keep people consuming and engaged through, obviously, the changing industry and everything that's going on? So I think maybe sometimes we undersell the user experience of side of things. And I think that's incredibly important when you're trying to establish the model. For us, we like to drive traffic for the schools. Once you get them into the network is when we hope that they'll continue to enjoy everything around the league. But if you have Columbia, for example, we want Columbia taking them to Columbia content. So that's our marketing directors, and hopefully they're leading them there. Once they're in the network, it's our job to make sure that they stay there and keep consuming content and enjoy their experience. One way to do that is giving them the option of watching 4 games at once. Maybe they watch 3 Columbia games, but 1 Penn game. For us, that's a win, but it doesn't go without acknowledging at least the user experience.
Right. Yeah, so some of the examples here have been really good in terms of things you can do in a digital platform, over-the-top platform, that you can't do on a traditional linear. And the 2 things that we've done, for some key wrestling events this year in the Big Ten Wrestling Championships, the Midlands event that Northwestern hosts, and the NWCA event that the National Duels that Iowa hosted this year. We did individual mat cams. So there'd be 4 mats. If you follow wrestling, these multi-team events, they have 4 duels happening at once on the court. And so we would have individual mat cams, and we would stream mat 1, mat 2, mat 3, mat 4 within BTN to go. The response from the wrestling community to be able to get more was tremendous, and the viewership numbers were significantly more than we ever expected them to be. So to be able to do multiple events or multiple mats at once is something that is unique to the digital platform today. The other thing that we did we've done this for a few years now for football and some key basketball games, we do what we call field pass or court pass, which on TV, for programming purposes and ratings purposes and advertising purposes, we have our pregame show. So game kicks off at noon, we've got our 11 o'clock pregame show. But there's a segment of the audience out there that wants to be at the game that can't be at the game. And what we're able to do on a digital platform is to take the audience there. So we'll light up our cameras an hour before the game, an hour before kickoff, and launch a stream on BTN to go that takes you to Ohio Stadium, that takes you to Spartan Stadium, and we'll show the players warming up, we'll show the marching band, we'll show the crowd filing in, we'll show the coaches shaking hands at midfield, and it'll be an experience. It takes you to the basically field level, which is somewhere you could never be even if you had a ticket to the game. So it'll bring a fan into the experience of the football game when they can't be there, and so that's an ancillary piece of programming that doesn't necessarily work on linear because it's not for everybody, but it does extend BTN's reach to those that wish they could be there.
And I wanted to add that real quick, is we haven't even mentioned the term second screen experience yet, and that's something that's very, very key to note here. Is just like many of you guys are multitasking right now, and we're probably boring you to death, but the reality is that's the way the kind of people's minds work now, is you're always doing something else. And it's true when you're watching live sports. There's a boring play, it's not a very exciting part of the game. The minute something happens, you look up. So you want to be able to engage that second screen. And that's one of the things that Chromecast got right, is with a lot of these apps that people have developed, is they're not available on the Apple TV because it's a harder SDK to develop for. So they develop it, so what people do is they develop it for your Android or your iOS device, and people will AirPlay it to their Apple TV. And I'm sure you guys have done that if you have an Apple TV. The problem then is your actual iPad or your iOS device now is not usable because you've AirPlayed the screen. So that second screen experience goes away, and it's a poor experience for your end user. With Chromecast, what they got right is pretty much your mobile device becomes a controller, but then you can also get on Twitter, you can get on Facebook, you can interact with the ads that are on there, you can monetize. There are all these other things you can do. I see that being kind of the future of OTT. And I think Chromecast has done that. Roku has gone that direction with their casting stick. Amazon's done that with their Fire Stick. So you see people kind of moving in that direction. I see that being the future of OTT.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the next 3 to 4 years, because obviously any decisions made today, the whole environment changes very quickly, right? So, and obviously there's things like 4K on the horizon. And I think what I always think about OTT is that your goal is to really have to your point, I think, to have a big screen experience that's not through a traditional cable package. So therefore, there is a need for a more high quality video experience, right? Because you're going to a bigger screen. So, Brian, what do you see as far as, how do you see the landscape changing as far as the ability to deliver higher quality video through those OTT channels to a TV and do 4K, for example, sports?
Well, I think, I just heard the previous session talking about SEC, and a lot of universities were still on SD platforms, just moving to HD. So to talk about 4K seems like probably not the right place for it. But it's the reality that you have to kind of future-proof your broadcasting. We were just talking about that a lot of the satellite providers still don't have their infrastructure in place to support 4K. Some of the conventional cable providers do. From an internet perspective, you're seeing broadband, you see Google expanding into the data space, getting into the hardware space as an ISP. It's going to continue to bring the price down, that race to zero for bandwidth. It's going to bring the bandwidth speeds up. And especially to a global audience, you can stream across the globe. I think with 4K streaming, there's a couple of different distinctions that need to be made here. And I'll get a little geeky here, so hopefully you guys don't get too, eyes don't glaze over. But from a 4K perspective, it's this difference between what the codec is and what the resolution is. So currently, H.264 is king as a codec, as a video codec. With 4K, you can get 4K resolution.
The codec compresses and decompresses the signal.
Exactly, yeah. So codec, it codifies it, and then it decodes it, right? Code and decode. So with the codec, H.264 has been king for 10 plus years. You can still, encode 4K as H.264, but the compression algorithms inside that codec aren't really that great. So it's still not the best to send 4K signal over an internet bandwidth pipe. So with H.265, that's kind of the new step, and then there's this other talk about VP9. Those are two different codecs that are kind of fighting it out to see who will kind of take control of 4K in the future as a future platform. I think from the Wowza side, and once again, I'll give you a little bit of a sales pitch, we're platform agnostic. We don't care if you do H.265 or if you do VP9. And this is really that whole Sony versus Betamax battle that happened in the 80s and probably the late 70s. Is really that's happening all again with this VP9 versus H.265. So from a 4K perspective, you have to make sure that you invest in an infrastructure that will support that in 5 years' time. If your production platform is all in that, but your streaming platform isn't, then you're going to be stuck with a subpar stream. The final point I'll make on it is something that's called adaptive bitrate streaming. People deliver over the HTTP protocol, which is how most of us access the internet. CDN networks like Akamai, Limelight, Level 3 have invested in that infrastructure to actually deliver content. You don't want to send a 4K stream to an end user who doesn't have the bandwidth to support it or a device that supports it. With adaptive bitrate, you can pull in that one high 4K, and using your streaming server technology, you can actually encode to all of these different resolutions that will apply to whatever device you happen to be on. If you're on a 3G connection on an old Android device, it will show you a 480p stream or something like that. So that's something to consider is you going to 4K, be able to render out those additional resolutions to deliver to all these different OTT platforms and different ISP network conditions as well.
So Michael and Matt, how do you kind of look at the in-house versus out-of-house as far as operations and getting ready for the future, and so you don't find yourself going down a rabbit hole that you can't get out of?
So from a partner standpoint, we rely on a partner. It happens to be New Line as well for BTN to manage the encoding and the transcoding and the delivery of the actual streams to our viewers in the digital space. We had no interest in building out our own encoder farm and trying to encode for the various platforms that at the time we needed to make those decisions. We didn't know what platforms we would be on in a year or 2 years. So we view ourselves as a content company, and we want to outsource as much as possible the delivery of that content in a digital world to our viewers. And it just makes sense for us. Our joint venture partners at Fox, when they built out Fox Sports Go, they took the opposite approach, and they built a lot of resources in-house. They spent a lot of money in-house. And it made sense for them at the time, and I think that there may be some momentum to be rethinking that and looking to outsource as well. So, we know what we don't know, right? Like, I can't speak to the technology the way Ryan just did, but there are people like Ryan out there that that can certainly help companies like BTN and schools make those decisions and execute that for those that own the content.
So for us, I mean, it's like Michael said, our job is the content, and our job is to make sure that we're putting quality productions forth, and maybe leave the technological side over to a business partner and trust them that you have a good enough relationship that they're setting you up for the future. Our job is to create the content, tell the message and expand the brand as much as possible. Give them your objectives. I think one of the big things that we learned is we all want to monetize it. We all want the biggest reach, and we all want our platforms to do X, Y, and Z. We want them to engage. We want to attract every audience possible, prospective student athletes, current students, and we all want them to come to the game and not watch on our networks. I think the biggest thing for us is understanding all of those dynamics and then leaving the technological future to a good partner that you trust and put your faith in.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ryan, talk about you mentioned during our conversation being an appless future, or sort of like the web browser is the app. So maybe explain how you kind of see that possibly evolving.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about the codec a little bit, the H.265 versus VP9. VP9 is backed by Google. That's their codec, but they've kind of put it in this open source standard. But Google is the only one driving that codec. With H.265, it's kind of this non-proprietary consortium that's all kind of pitching into developing this other codec. So there's kind of these differing views. Kind of what it means is inside of the Google Chrome browser with VP9, you can actually encode to VP9, live stream directly in the browser using HTML5 video. What this means, it takes away the need for a separate player, like a flash player, so you can pretty much play it back on every device. It's creating these standards as opposed to these proprietary workflows that we had in the past. Before, Real Player was one of the first players to get into live streaming. You had to use Real Player server delivered to a Real Player player that was a client on someone's local computer. People are getting away from that. They're getting into these kind of workflows that are much more sustainable, much more non-proprietary. With Apple developed HLS, which is the predominant HLS HTTP live streaming protocol to deliver. People want to get away from that, and so the new protocols that are kind of evolving now are MPEG- for H.265, and then there's WebM, which is for VP9. So with WebM, you can actually live stream directly in the browser, and with MPEG- you can do the same. Both are still being developed, and both are still works in progress. But what this ends up creating for the app experience is your website. If you develop your website by these standards, your website becomes the app. Your website becomes the place where everybody goes to, regardless of what device they're on. That's what I see being the future, is people getting away from these proprietary networks. And I see that being, Chromecast is leading the way in that way with their own development or their own technologies. I see other people following suit. It just remains to be seen who wins out, the codec battle as well as this protocol battle of delivering over that particular language. So it'll be interesting to see.
There's a very good documentary series on HBO called Silicon Valley that goes right into these sort of issues. So, people watch.
Yeah, I actually worked at Hulu before, so.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
But now you're a Pied Piper.
Yes.
So let's answer the question. How does somebody, the question of the session is, are you ready to go over the top? So most people could say, yes, I'm ready. Because, just like, are you ready to have an app? Sure. So how do you know if you are ready to? Is there a way to know when you look in your organization that you are ready to go over the top? Is it because you're missing revenue, or because you just feel like you want to hit the casual fan?
So again, for us, there's an expectation, and making administrations and our athletic directors understand that there is an expectation. Reach is great, audience is great. With that comes the ability to put forth quality productions and on a consistent basis. So for us, it's been figuring it out for the first 2 years, and we've been lucky to partner with someone that understands that. Once you go over the top, quote unquote, there is that expectation that you have it all figured out, that you have your workflows figured out, that you can continue to share content on a regular basis, on a daily basis, even when live events aren't happening, especially during the conference season. There's an audience for that. And I think it just changes the consumer's expectation when you launch into a platform like that. That's our goal, and I think it's a goal for maybe other conferences our size, is to get to that point where we feel good enough with our programming and the quality of our programming to take an initiative like that on.
Yeah, in whatever way, shape, or form it takes place, whether it's in an app, whether it's in a mobile-friendly site, whether it's on a connected device. I mean, every company that creates content today needs to have some sort of strategy for delivering content on these devices. I mean, it's 2015. The metrics for viewership of video on smartphones, on tablets, on game consoles, on Rokus and Apple TVs and Chromecasts and Amazon Fire devices, it's growing exponentially by the month, and so you need to be in that space. There's no way around it. We as a company that focuses primarily on live events, realized very early on, and we were very fortunate 4 years ago to be able to launch BTN to Go, really well before most places or most companies like ours were able to get into the TV everywhere space. I think we launched it 2 or 3 months after Watch ESPN. We were fortunate in that our rights deal with the conference calls for us to have all those rights. Other sports networks, ESPN spent a decade trying to get all the rights that they needed to be able to launch Watch ESPN. And then at the regional level, it's much more complex. The FSNs and Comcast Sportsnets of the world are still struggling with trying to secure all the rights that they need to deliver the content. But I think the issue for most of the people in this room really goes back to the rights. Like, does your school have the rights to create apps and mobile and over-the-top connected device experiences? And if not, how do you work with the entity that has those rights? And how do you work with your conference or your conference's network or your media rights holder in order to make solutions that work for what your goals are and work for what the rights holders' goals are as well?
In terms of prioritizing, if you haven't done a lot of apps or a TV everywhere service or OTT, should OTT move to the top of the list there? Does it solve the other does it solve the other needs, or do you start with TV everywhere and that'll get until OTT gets sorted out? Or any thoughts?
I think, from a business perspective, they'll have definitely more insight than I do on that front. But even some of these really, really large providers, people with hundreds of millions of dollars backing them, don't deliver to all these OTT devices. And I'll use Sling TV as an example. They don't have an Apple TV app yet. I don't know if it's on the horizon. I have Sling TV, and I had to actually buy a Roku device so I could consume this. I got tired of airplaying my content from the app. So
they don't have one because Apple's going to launch their own over-the-top service.
That too. So it's like, it'd be interesting to actually see. So that's the first thing to keep in mind is, don't expect you're going to reach all these OTT devices, especially at the beginning. Baby steps. I think the easiest deployment from my experience is definitely Chromecast. One of our partners is JW Player. You guys have probably heard of them. They're the world's kind of leading HTML5 and Flash player. They have a Chromecast implementation that literally inside the player, you can put it on your website, and just like you do on YouTube or just like you do inside of any web page, it has that little Chromecast button, and you could Chromecast directly to your device. So that literally within a couple of hours, even less than an hour, you could actually get up and running on Chromecast directly from your website without having to develop your own custom app. And I think that's the thing, once again, going back to the future, I think Chromecast got that right. I think the web is the interface. It's like, why are people developing their own interface? We already have the web, so let's use it. And I think that's the future of that. So whether you want to develop your own, Xbox, PlayStation, I'll let you guys make that decision, but there's a lot of money and infrastructure involved in that.
I agree that the web is definitely potentially the future. The one thing that's interesting, and let me ask you from the Ivy League perspective, with HTML5-based website and not having an app, what percentage of your traffic is mobile versus, traditionally desktop, laptop, browser-based?
So that's the one difference between us is we are significantly lower than what you would now consider mobile usage. I think that's a focus for us, but that's the one thing for a web-based app. You can get it everywhere, but educating your audience, educating especially our demographic of where we're going, where we are, it's very simplistic right now. Everybody knows that you can go to www.insert link here, and that will get you there, and it'll get you to all the content that you could possibly consume. But understanding that and getting them to that via social media, wherever it is, getting them to that webpage is something that you'll struggle with a little bit in the opening, especially via mobile.
But it's going to take changing consumer behavior, because I think today,
Exactly.
people have been accustomed to using apps. We had, when we integrated BTN Plus content into BTN to Go this year, for the previous couple of seasons, that was in a HTML5 supported browser, separate from BTN to Go, and it was about 3% mobile/tablet usage. When we integrated that into BTN to Go this year, it jumped to 50%. So it's the consumer, teaching the consumer that this video, this content, whether it's a live event or an entertainment programming, whatever it might be, that it's available in a traditional web-based environment in your Safari browser on your iPad or your Chrome browser on your Android device. I just don't think that the public has been trained yet that this is an option, and I think it's a challenge for the industry.
Sure. Any questions from the audience? Oh, here you go. Mike's coming around.
Check. Taking it even a step further, a little off topic, but for Matt, apps like Periscope and Meerkat now are becoming popular, especially with kids that may be prospective students. Looking at that, are you going to embrace that and maybe put some quick hits out on that? And for Michael, is that something that maybe scares you a little bit?
So he may have a completely different answer, but for us, we're trying to embrace it. I mean, we see it as a big opportunity for us and apply a little common sense to it as well. We've worked with the partner, be it New Line, to work out a common sense initiatives. I'll give two quick ones. For us, it's all about the digital network, right? So when you have your talent periscoping their 3 keys to the game 5 minutes before a broadcast and then say, hey, you can go watch the game live on the Ivy League Digital Network, to us, that's making the most of Periscope. I think the other thing is when it comes to the common sense side, Periscope and fans in the stands for us at least, they can't cover it the way that we're going to cover it, whether it's multi-cameras, talent that you can listen to and trust, as close to the action as possible. Until that audience, we're not Mayweather-Pacquiao. Until you get to that level of audience, any exposure for the league is great. We're all about the Ivy League Digital Network. That's great. The greater good is, for us, Ivy League athletics. If it's promoting the greater good via Periscope or anything else, that's our chief objective.
Yeah, we're never going to be able to police people in the stands, shooting, live video from Periscope to their followers, but and nor should we. I mean, that experience I don't think is competitive to the television product or the professionally produced or multi-camera product that we can offer from a rights perspective. And I think that there was a lot made out of the fight and the piracy that happened during the pay-per-view. Probably way too much, honestly. It was kind of the perfect storm. It was a very expensive fight. It was really only available on television. It wasn't available on smartphones and tablets. Periscope was just born. It was 3 or 4 weeks old, and it sort of took everybody by surprise in terms of how it happened. But it's piracy. Piracy's been around forever. We've been dealing with piracy since we launched in 2007 when we were fighting for distribution. There were dozens of illegal websites out there streaming our games, and the difference between that and Periscope and Meerkat is just the ease with which piracy can happen. But ultimately, I think that as this moves on, there'll be ways to deal with the piracy. There'll be takedown measures. There'll be smarter technology that Twitter, as the owner of Periscope, and Meerkat and others will invest in, because they're not in the business or wanting to be in the business of violating copyright. So I think that will evolve. I'm not necessarily concerned about it. I'm watching it. I'm not necessarily concerned about it. I think, to Matt's point, we need to figure out, how do we as a TV network, how do our member institutions, how does our conference, how do we take advantage, how do we utilize Periscope to our advantage? How do we come up with an execution that benefits everybody, from the programs to the rights holders, and promotes the conference and the sports and promotes the television product that is out there?